Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the best recordings and some of the not-so-best recordings of Schumann's Piano Concerto, one of the most beloved works in the concerto repertoire. This has been a very difficult talk to assemble, and I'll tell you why. The problem is that, first of all the major pianists in the universe record the Schumann Concerto, often in tandem with the Grieg Concerto, but not always. And most of them, and here's the catch, most of them have done it more than once. Some of them have done it more than twice. And so not only do you have just a vast list of pianists who have done the concerto, but you have most of them doing it more than once, and they're not equally good. And sometimes they are, and then you have to pick one, and sometimes they're not, and you have to avoid one. And that makes things just terribly, terribly complicated. The work itself is tricky. It's really surprisingly tricky. It's so beautiful, and it's so tuneful. And so it's seemingly effortless, even though, as we know, it cost Schumann quite a bit of effort. It started out as a single movement, and he only gradually assembled the other two movements to make a full concerto. But it really offers so many pitfalls for the pianist. There are issues of balance between the piano and the orchestra, and not Schumann's fault, mind you, in the sense that, Schumann is known for being a terrible orchestrator, but the scoring of this piece is gorgeous. It's absolutely beautiful. The balances should work, but they require serious cooperation between the soloist and the conductor. And not just that, a lot of the most important moments, musically speaking, in terms of giving you a complete impression of the performance, happen not in the essentially main tunes. They happen during transitional passages. The most typical of those is right at the beginning of the first movement. You hear the opening theme on the woodwinds, and then on the piano, da 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 da, ya da 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 da. You know how it goes, right? But then the music starts to move, ya da da, ya da da da, and then it goes ya da da da, ya da da da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, and it's accompanying. The piano is accompanying the orchestra, not the other way around. So you need a soloist who can back off, let the orchestra do its thing, and you need a conductor who understands that the music wants to surge and who gives just that little touch of energy when you get to ya da 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 ba da 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 da. You want to hear these things. When you hear it done right, it's the most glorious passage in the world, and it's purely transitional. It doesn't actually represent the first subject or the second subject of the concerto, but it's just as important. And so trying to put all of these elements together is a little bit tricky. The slow movement is tricky. It's tricky because it's short. Schumann's slow movements, his tiny lyrical song-like slow movements, they're exquisite. They're such perfectly polished miniatures, beautifully tuneful, but you have to play them with great ease and naturalness and songfulness. They're all about touch and the long lyrical line, even if the melody, as in this case, is somewhat staccato, dum bum bum bum, dum bum bum bum. You touch it in, but it has to sing. And then, of course, you have the finale, which you would think takes care of itself, and it kind of does. It's just full of schwung. But there's a tendency to let it drag a little bit, and that should never, ever, ever, ever happen. And so everyone's doing it. There are a lot of really very, very good ones. I don't think there are all that many really, really great ones, but I'm going to go through a whole pile of them. I don't even know how many there are here. I think there's about 15 or 16, but like I said, because there's so much duplication between pianists, even within the same work, we have to talk about multiple versions with the same artists. And so we'll see how many it works out. Maybe more than 20. Who knows? I have no idea. But let's get started with a historical recording. Something I often do not do. But I do think there is a historical recording of the Schumann Concerto that everybody should hear at some point in their lives, and it's probably on YouTube, so you can listen to it without paying for it. And that is, let me get it sitting up here. Yes, Alfred Cortot. His second one. He did it twice too, but his second electrical recording. This is with the English conductor Landon Ronald. And it's the better sounding, and it's the better performance on the whole. And Cortot's performance of this is unlike any other you will ever hear. I mean, he is a old school virtuoso in so many respects. And in this piece, he does things that if someone did them today, people would have a heart attack. I mean, the transition between the slow movement and the finale, it sounds like it's never going to get going. He takes so much time over it. And then the finale just takes off like a shot. You know, there's all kinds of flexibility of phrasing, freedom of phrasing. Every note means something in this performance, but sensibly. It makes sense. It's fascinating to hear somebody play with that much freedom and that much interventionism and not micromanage the piece at all. And make it all just flow along beautifully. That is a real art. And if you want to hear how to do it, Cortot is your man with Landon Ronald, that one. And like I said, you can probably find it anywhere. It's in all kinds of boxes. And Naxos Historical has a version of it. It sounds lousy, but you can hear what the pianist does. And that's what's really important. So we're going to start there. And then we're just going to go through a whole stack of Schumann concertos, and we'll see where we wind up, because I'm not quite sure yet as I begin this talk where it's going to end. Now, one of them that I've always enjoyed that people don't really talk about anymore is Arthur Rubinstein. I mean, this is with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Carlo Maria Gellini when he was in his, sort of earlier phase. It's still a slow performance. It's a very relaxed, very gracious performance. Rubinstein could be like that. He had this aristocratic elegance that was really beautiful. I mean, when it worked. And this was recorded in 1967. It was before Rubinstein's technique had really started to disintegrate. So it's a fine performance, and I just enjoy it. I enjoy it for its mellowness. I enjoy it for the effortless ease with which it moves, and for Gellini's contribution with the Chicago Symphony. Because make no mistake, the conductor and the orchestra in this concerto are just as important as the pianist is. Quite often, as I just explained to you, there's so many moments where the piano is accompanying the orchestra, or there has to be a chamber music-like interplay between members of the orchestra and the keyboard and the conductor. If you have a great conductor, then you're going to have a much better job, a much more satisfying version than if you have someone who's just sort of beating time underneath and ignoring, letting the pianist just blast away at whatever the pianist wants to do. So I start with Rubinstein just to throw it out there and remind you all that it's there and it's worth considering. And, granted, he was no Cortot. But then again, Cortot dated Clara Schumann, right? No, anyway, you know what I mean. All right, next, Murray Perahia. Now, Murray Perahia did it twice. He did it first with the Grieg Concerto with Colin Davis, and then there's this one with Claudio Arrau and the Berlin Phil. I prefer this one, first of all, because I think the performance has just that bit more freshness than the earlier one. I think that's the earlier one. I think I have them right. I may have them mixed up, but I like this one better. And it also has, what's I think also very, very nice, is the other two big Schumann piano and orchestra works. The Introduction in Allegro Appassionato and the Introduction in Allegro. Those Concertstückchen things, which all composers back in those days wrote. Short works for solo and orchestra that today never get played. If it weren't for recordings, you would never know they exist, because concert people will not play them. They won't do them. They're too short. They're not full concerto length. And it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. I did a whole video on short works for piano and orchestra where I talk about these two, and you really ought to have a look at it, because there are wonderful programs that could be assembled from taking 2 or 3 or 4 of these things and making a concerto and a full-length program out of them. It would be just marvelous. Anyway, Perahia is his usual sensitive self. He was never a fire-breathing virtuoso type, although he really can play. I mean, his Hammerklavier Sonata is amazing. It really is. My colleague Jed Distler thought it was fabulous, and so did I. So he certainly has the chops for it, and his natural sensitivity makes for some exquisite moments throughout the performance. It's very, very beautiful. So that's one of them that I've always liked. Which one is this? Oh, yeah. This is a real tangle. Martha Argerich. And Martha Argerich. And there's another Martha Argerich. There are at least 3. The first one, this one is with Rostropovich conducting. This is the one I kind of like. This is the one that has the most, I think, sort of freewheeling fun to it. You know, it just goes, and Argerich is her usual dazzling self. I think that's pretty cool. I really do. The next one she did was with Harnoncourt, and it was coupled with the violin concerto with Gideon Kramer, and that's a really tremendous performance of the violin concerto. The piano concerto is Argerich, and it's with the Chamber Orchestra of Europe. I don't know. It's a little odd for me. I mean, I admire Argerich, because you can't not admire Argerich, but I think Harnoncourt in that music, he's just a little bit too manipulative. Maybe that's the word. Although she kind of takes charge of it at one point. She tends to do that, But in the violin concerto, they're wonderful. So, a lot of people like that Teldec recording, and I can understand why. I really can. It's quite special. And then there's this one. The trouble with this is that Argerich almost never got worse, but her companions did not get better when she made these recordings. Because she does the same thing over and over again, and she wants to do it with her friends, and she doesn't care who they are, and she doesn't care how bad they are, as long as they're her friends. And this one is with, who is it? It's like the Orchestra della Svizzera Italiana under Alexander Rabinovich. He's not very good. The orchestra's not very good. She's terrific. But, I can put this away. It goes up there. Yeah, it sits up there. So, you should have an Argerich, but you got to pick your one. Like I said, I like the first one on DG Best, but you may like the one with Harnoncourt, and I can understand it. But the EMI one, I think, is a pass. I really do. Now, here's a real sleeper. Kind of an exception that proves the rule, but I like this record. I just enjoy it. It has a freshness and just a sense of fun, and it's not all that heavy. The lack of heaviness is wonderful in a performance of this caliber. This is on Chandos. This is Howard Shelley with the Orchestra of Opera North, which he is conducting, actually, proving yet again that most orchestras can play things without conductors. He's very non-interventionist. The orchestra sounds just great, and this is one hell of a coupling. It's a 79-minute CD. You get the Schumann, the Grieg, and the Saint-Saëns Second Piano Concerto. It's really a great deal, and the performances are fleet and light and just a joy. It's simple joy in music making. There's no attempt to be, profound or extra deep or to schmooze around with the music or take it to pieces. On the other hand, it's not uninflected. It's beautifully sensitive, and there's a real conception here. That conception happens to be one of grace and lightness, and I'm all for it. I really am. So Howard Shelley, this really surprised me. I like Howard Shelley. He's a wonderful pianist. But, to hear these 3 works all on one handy-dandy CD, that's pretty cool. So I like that. Again, I like it for the whole disc. Another disc I like complete is this one. This is on pentatone with Martin Helmchen and the Strasbourg Philharmonic under Mark Albrecht. This is a really fine recording of the Dvorak and a really fine recording of the Schumann. Now, Helmchen is a real up-and-comer right now. He's doing a fabulous Beethoven piano, or completed a fabulous Beethoven piano concerto series that's on Alpha. And he's a very, very sensitive artist, and it's great, I think, to have the Schumann coupled to the Dvorak, because it's not the Grieg. So if you have 400 versions of the Grieg and you don't have 400 versions of the Dvorak, here's a really good opportunity to get them both on a disc. This is really, I think, kind of special, and it's beautifully recorded. So that's a very, very nice one. Then, of course, we have to talk about Richter. Sviatoslav Richter, yes. All right, this is his better Schumann performance. There's also an EMI one with, I think, Lovro von Matovic conducting, which is very good. It's okay. I mean, he was always good in this work. A little bit, sometimes, I think, a little heavy. Maybe a little stiff in his response. But this is with the Warsaw, I think it's the Warsaw Philharmonic. Yeah, the Warsaw National Philharmonic under Witold Rawicki, who we all like. And this is kind of a classic recording. It's not one of my favorites, but it has, it's Richter. It has wonderful, wonderful moments. And it's coupled with the introduction in Allegro Appassionato, which is nice to have. And then some other Schumann pieces, including the Toccata, which is a knockout, and some Waldzane in bits, and the Novelette in F major. Beautiful stuff. So, because it's Richter, people want this because it's Richter. Or you want his EMI one. It's your call. It's your call. He's a great artist. It's a great concerto. It's a very, very good performance. I don't want to mince words. Still on Deutsche Grammophon. This one. Remember this one? This is one of those early digitals that actually they cleaned up the sound when they made the Karajan Gold Edition. I think a little bit anyway. It sounds better than it used to. This is Karajan with Christian Zimmerman. This is vintage Karajan, big gluey legato textures, and Zimmerman, who was really actually a match for Karajan in that sense. They are big performances. I mean, they're on a grand scale. They're deliberate but really gorgeously played. Absolutely gorgeous. I mean, Zimmerman's playing in these performances is not anything like the sort of mannered every note counts a lot that he later became and currently is, by the way. Although I haven't heard his Beethoven piano concertos yet. We'll see how that came out. But this got a lot of very, very favorable press when it was first released, and I think deservedly so. Karajan did not make a lot of concerto recordings. He was not an easy guy, concerto-wise, because he had such a huge ego and he tended to overwhelm his soloists. And so he chose them with care, and they chose him with care. And I think this was a good match. Really a good match. The two of them play off of each other quite well. Some people have said that these performances are just too thick and too deliberate and too studied. But that's the kind of artist Zimmerman was, and that's the kind of artist Karajan was. Of its type, it's a legitimate approach and quite beautiful. Really, really beautiful. However, if you want to hear Karajan doing the Schumann concerto in a slightly earlier phase when he was a little quicker and a little less the maestro, then you have to get Dinu Lipatti. Not because of Karajan, but because it's Lipatti. I mean, you've got to have everything Lipatti did. And there's only 7 discs of it in this icon set or whatever, this EMI classics thing, and including the Schumann and the Grieg, and his Schumann concerto is one of the all-time classic, shocking, fabulous, amazing things that anybody ever did. Lipatti was the piano equivalent of those amazing Hungarian and Romanian conductors and violinists who could take a tune like Fricoy or Sándor Vég or Constantine Silvestri. We all love them. We love them all. We've talked about them. I've done a million videos about them. We've gone back and forth. You all know they had the ability to make music come alive, to humanize it, to make it warm and expressive and giving and fulsome. And how they did it, I have no clue, but they did it. And if there was a guy who played the keyboard, the piano, who could do it the way those string guys and conductors did it, it was Lipatti. And with Karajan, it's a fabulous performance of the Schumann, and it belongs in every collection, plain and simple. So Lipatti is one of those sort of eternal recordings that every collection has to have. So now let's look at, I have some others of these, and they're not, they're in boxes. Well, one of the other issues with this concerto and performances of them is that a lot of them have disappeared as single releases, and they've been boxed up. Or if they, or I have the single release in the overflow room, and I kept the box here because it saves space, And one of those was this one. Yes, Dinu Lipatti, another fabulous Romanian. His Schumann and Grieg coupling with Andrei Previn is a Decca legend, as you can see from this particular configuration. And it's wonderfully artistic. Lupu, pardon me, Radu Lupu is such a sensitive artist. And I have the big Radu Lupu box here, which I'm not going to get down, and take my word for it. His Schumann-Grieg coupling is one of the great Schumann-Grieg couplings. So if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for a Schumann-Grieg coupling, Lupu is a wonderful modern choice. Another one that's an interesting choice is, sort of a classic choice, is Wilhelm Kempff. And here he is with Raphael Kubelik. Kempff, of course, gets a lot of play in this repertoire because Schumann was German and he's German, and you got to have a German pianist, since all of the others seem to be Eastern Europeans or Russians or Argentinians or something else. And Kempff was for so many years the iconic German pianist, but he was a wonderful Schumann performer. He recorded about 6 CDs of Schumann solo piano music. They used to be released separately as a Kempff plays Schumann set, and it was wonderful. And he's wonderful. He's absolutely wonderful. And so his Schumann concerto with Kubelik, who of course is no slouch, is a lovely performance for those of you who like that kind of stylistic approach, that very honest, very straight, very considered and sober, but it's not heavy. It never was, because Kempff didn't have that kind of tone. He actually had a fairly light touch and a brittle tone even. So it's kind of interesting to hear the approach married to his tonal preferences. So it's nice to talk about him too. Next, a classic, Fleisher Szell. Again, if you want Grieg and Schumann, you can hardly do better than this if you want them together. One of the catches, though, what I have here. Oh yeah, there's another one I have to stuff in here too. One of the catches here is that the sound is not great in these performances. Of course, they're in the big Szell box and they're in the Fleischer box, but wow, they're wonderful performances. Absolutely fabulous performances. You can't do better than Szell as an accompanist, and Fleischer was at the absolute peak of his form, around the late 50s, early 60s, somewhere in there. And this is one of the classic Grieg Schumann couplings, right up there with Radu Lupu and a few others. Another one that I need to mention, which I have sitting over in a box, is Claudio Arrau. Now, Claudio Arrau did these concertos a few times, and the best one is the Concerto recording that's on Decca Eloquence. Last time I checked, it's in the big Arrau box. It's a few other places, but it was with Christoph von Dohnanyi conducting. His later one was also with the Concerto, and I think Colin Davis was conducting, and it's very heavy, very serious, very deliberate. Some people think he just overwhelms the pieces. I don't think so. I mean, it's late Arrau is late Arrau, and you either loved him or you didn't. But he wasn't so late on that earlier recording with Dohnanyi. Everything is just that much more vibrant and alive, in my view, and the tempi are just a bit quicker. But Claudio Arrau is also worth considering. I mean, there was a guy, his touch was so beautiful. So beautiful. His phrasing was just magisterial. He was the Otto Klemperer of the piano, and also a very, very sensitive artist, and not the kind of virtuoso, although he was a virtuoso, who just would overwhelm the orchestra. He was very good in these pieces that require real collaboration between the solo and the orchestra. So Arrau is another one on Eloquence, another one you really want to consider. Now we're down to my top 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, really 3, actually. My top 3. And we've talked about a lot of them already. We really have. I've been going through them rather quickly because I've done some pretty long videos lately. And I don't think we need to spend too much time on every single version that we can dig up. Although God knows there are many, many, many more of them. And I know you'll have your favorites too, which I'm going to hear about shortly. Anyway, one of my top 3. Nelson Freire. Nelson Freire, one of his early recordings. Now, the reason these are so wonderful, this is in the Nelson Freire box, is because he's in Munich with the Munich Philharmonic, accompanied by Rudolf Kempff. And Kempff he's one of those chord guy conductors. He loved sound. He makes Schumann's orchestration sound so lustrous. And the young Freire was a genius at the keyboard. He didn't have a lot of promotion, at least in this country, maybe not in Europe either. Sony, when they released these things on LP, I had them on LP, they were on the Odyssey label, the cheapy label, because he was not a big name major artist. Only later in his life, first of all, he started making records with Martha Argerich, and then, Decca picked him up. He was as a grand old man of the piano. But he wasn't just a grand old man. He was a grand young man, too. An amazing young man at the piano. And I think this Freire Kempff Schumann Concerto is just phenomenal. And there's a Grieg in here that's great, too. So you should really, really give Freire a chance. It's just wonderful if you can get your hands on it. Next. Okay, here is another trick pianist we have to deal with. This is my number 2. It could be my number 1. Sometimes it is my number 1. Ivan Moravec. Now, Moravec also did this twice. This is the one with the Czech Philharmonic and Václav Neumann, coupled with the Franck Symphonic Variations. It's an incredible performance. But he also did it, it's in the big Moravec box on Dorian, a live recording with the Dallas Symphony Orchestra and Eduardo Mata. It's not as good. It's not as well recorded either. It was a live recording, like I said, and it was kind of a catch-as-catch-can thing. He also did the Brahms First Concerto with them. And I just don't think it shows Moravec at his absolute best. Either performance, frankly. It's in the big Moravec box. So you should be aware of that. The one you want is the Superphone recording with Neumann and the Czech Philharmonic, because you get the Czech Philharmonic, and Neumann is a very, very good accompanist in this work, and it's very well recorded, considering it's the Rudolfinum, which has lots of reverberation, and you get an amazing Franck Symphonic Variations with it. Not the longest playing time, perhaps, but great, great, great musicianship. And Moravec was really one of the 20th century's greatest poets of the piano. And with the most exquisite touch, a million colors, an incredibly musical sensibility, just a wonderful artist. And I've talked about him before. Everybody seems to agree with that proposition. I've never heard anyone who had a bad word to say about him. That doesn't mean you like everything he did, but he was very limited in what he did. He was very picky about only wanting to do the best and only wanting to give of his best. That's why those Dorian recordings are a little bit disappointing, because they're not bad, but they're not his best. And like every great artist, he had his good days and less good days. And the Schumann Concerto just seems to be that concerto that brings out the less good days among the artists who've already given it their best days. It's a tough piece to do well twice, it seems. But Moravec is on Superphone is extraordinary. Don't get them confused. Do not get them confused. It's just amazing. However, I got to pick one, and this one is a classic. It is a classic. It's a classic for good, solid reason, and it is Rudolf Serkin with Eugene Ormandy on Sony. First of all, Serkin was, the great German pianist who was not in Germany when Kempff was the great German pianist who was in Germany, because Serkin, of course, was Jewish, and we had a slight event called World War II, and he wound up in the U.S., but he was maybe arguably one of the handful, let's just say, of the ultimate German pianists of the 20th century, and especially in the German repertoire, especially in Beethoven. He made the only tolerable recording of the Reger Piano Concerto, the only one, and he just was a supreme artist in this repertoire. And his Schumann Concerto with Ormandy it's the reference from which all other Schumanns are drawn. It really is just an amazing performance, not the least because of Ormandy. Everyone says, oh yeah, Ormandy was a great accompanist, and he was. But this concerto, as we've said, requires much more than mere accompaniment. It requires a positive contribution from the conductor and the orchestra, and Ormandy provides exactly that. You get orchestral playing that is as refined and polished, but also rhythmic and motive, full of movement. That it's as great as anything you could ever ask for. And Serkin always had a kind of flinty tone, as I think mentioned in connection with Kempff. He was never a tone guy. And it's a wonderful thing, I have to tell you this, when you have a pianist who's interested in long contrapuntal lines and accent and a slight acerbity of timbre, with a conductor who is the most luscious, rich, yummy guy out there. You put them together and you have the piano operating in an ideal framework. Just an ideal framework, because they play off of each other. The sound of the orchestra offsets the sound of the piano. And when you have a pianist who's as sensitive as Serkin was, and who knows when to back off and let the orchestra do its thing, wow, the result is just magical. So, do make sure you have the Serkin Ormandy. Now this, again, you can get it with, well, this is with the Philippe Entremont Grieg. This is the old Essential Classics. But there's a single disc thing that has Serkin's other two Schumann piano and orchestra pieces. That's a CBS import. And of course, it's in the big Serkin box, and I'm sure it's downloadable any number of ways. But if you care about the Schumann Piano Concerto, you will want Rudolf Serkin. So my top choices, let's just say my top three are Moravec, Czechville, Neumann, and Freire, Kempff. When you have Kempff and Kempff in the same talk, it's always going to be a problem, at least for me. But Nelson Freire with Kempff in Munich, glorious. And best of all, Serkin and Ormandy. Then, of course, there's Fleisher and Szell, and there's Lupu and Previn, and there's Dinu Lipatti, who you've got to have. That's what happens when you have these pieces, these iconic works in the repertoire. There are, you could put together 10 or 12 performances which are staggeringly great and as fine as any others, and the rest is just how you feel on the day and what your choice is. You're not going to have to worry about finding the one, because we have the ones. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.